It's 1581, February 23rd, Japan, right in the middle of the Sengoku period. We don't know exactly what the day was like, but I'll take some creative liberties and assume it was a cold, foggy morning when the party rolled into Kyoto. Said party notably contained Alessandro Valignano? Anyway, a Jesuit missionary, his fellow missionary Louis Fro, and Valignano's attendant and black slave. Valignano... Fuck's sake. I'm just going to call him Alessandro. Had already spent 2 years in Japan, focusing his missionary efforts predominantly on the island of Kyushu. But he had recently, however, asked to have an audience with Oda Nobunaga, the Japan's first great unifier, and at that current point, the most powerful man in the country. Alessandro had wanted to have an audience with Nobunaga in order to, I guess, ensure the Jesuits' missionary work before they would depart Japan and continue their work elsewhere in Asia. Upon meeting Oda Nobunaga, the first thing that caught the leader's attention was none other than Alessandro's slave, who he had heard rumours about after a fight had broken out outside of the Jesuits' residence, and the townsfolk had given in reports of a giant, tall, dark-skinned man. Nobunaga had never seen a black man before, and he was most amazed by his complexion. He first believed that the skin had to have been inked, or something of the sort, but after multiple scrubbing... They got him butt naked and scrubbed him with soap. There's no... You can't put that politely. But after his doubts had been laid to rest and his proddings and testings had been concluded, it was clear that the slave was the real deal. And not only that, but as Oda Gyuchi says when writing the autobiography of Nobunaga's life, that the man looked robust and had a good demeanour. His formidable strength surpassed 10 men. Obviously an exaggeration, but you get the idea. The whole ordeal impressed Nobunaga so thoroughly that he insisted Alessandro give him the slave, and so named him Yasuke, took him by his side, and promoted him to be the first foreigner to ever hold the rank of samurai. Over the next 2 years, until the Honnoji incident, Yasuke would serve under Nobunaga as a skilled bodyguard and weapons bearer, following him around town to diplomatic meetings with other clans, was even given his own servants. Yasuke would, however, have an abrupt end to this role when, during said Honnoji incident, Akechi Mutsuhide, I'm sorry about the pronunciation, one of Nobunaga's top generals, would rebel against him, overwhelm him, and then Nobunaga committed seppuku. Yasuke would join Nobunaga's son, Nobutada, in an attempt to wrestle back control, but it would be in vain. And they too would be defeated, and Yasuke would be sent back to the Jesuit missionaries by Mitsuhide. As he was not Japanese, so his life should be spared. Now, whether or not this was Mitsuhide literally being so racist, he didn't think that Yasuke was worthy of death by his sword, or he actually liked Yasuke and was sparing his life. Again, the two obviously had known each other for, 2 years at that point. We'll never really know, although I am leaning towards the former. But point is, sadly, this is, as far as the history books is concerned, when Yasuke's story ends. He would, later on, go down as a very famous, interesting, and beloved historical figure in Japan. There are many stories about him and his exploits, and even to today, he is still somewhat well-known and well-liked. Broadly speaking, the story of Yasuke is a very interesting little historical tidbit, and just yet another interesting piece of information that came out of the incredibly turbulent Sengoku period, filled with constant wars, backstabbings, and oopsie-doopsies. So why, you may be asking, have I started a video about the Matrix, Parasite, and briefly mentioning the 2025 Australian federal election, talking about a niche historical fact from ancient Japan? Well, see, it's this little thing to do with... Boy, you guys knew I couldn't go a single video without getting political. So let's get back to it, people. Right. If I hear any of you motherfuckers talking about how I'm drinking White Monster, do remember I am a gym bro. It is in my blood. Right, so, anyway. What does the story of Yasuke, the Black Samurai, have to do with the non-existent culture war? Well, see, Yasuke's story entered into an interesting and precarious, although it shouldn't be, position when Ubisoft, your unemployed and divorced uncle of the video game world, is that a yay? Anyway, they used Yasuke's story as an inspiration for, well, a black samurai character in their new Assassin's Creed game. Now, to most Japanese people, and most people who even bothered to do a single Google search, this was no bother to them. Because, you know, it's a real story based on a real guy who did really exist. However, this story was caught in the crosshairs of the reactionary right content machine, who turned on their woke vision goggles and computed black man, lead character, video game, woke detected. Well, you get the idea. Now, this story is nothing special. People have covered it plenty, and it happens absolutely all the goddamn time. But what I find interesting about it is, well, how stuff like this happens. You can mostly just pin it on media illiteracy, and that would be right. But I want to break this down a little bit more thoroughly than that. Again, there's more going on here, and this whole culture war, woke spotting in movies, all of that garbage, is a symptom of a broader societal trend. Let me explain this all. You've all felt the creeping expansion and omnipresence of big tech companies these days, right? Ironic I'm saying this, given I run a YouTube channel. But we've all felt the disruption these companies have had to pretty much every industry. Again, disruption is important terminology here because that's the goal. That's what these companies do. They disrupt industries, they overinflate their value, they charge subscription services, and they monopolize. I have another video breaking down the actual serious consequences of that, and how it's indicative that healthy, normal capitalism has been shanked to death in the back alley behind a red rooster in Bankstown. But point is, we've all felt the effects of big tech's rise to the pantheon of corporate infamy, joining the ranks of others like multinational mining companies, former pieces of Standard Oil, the military-industrial complex, Big Pharma, the Red Shield banks, and before tech, their newest member, private equity. Like it or not, big tech companies like Alphabet, Meta, and even slightly more ambiguous tech-based companies like Uber or Tesla have joined the big boys club of totally not a repeat of trusts from the Gilded Age. Please God, don't resurrect Teddy Roosevelt. Point is, big tech now has the kind of sway over our governments that all of those other evil companies and industries have, which is even more of a problem when we factor in a couple little things about how these companies run and human biology. Right, I'm Dr. Stace, and welcome to today's lesson. Dopamine. We all know dopamine. We all know the problems with it. We all know how social media completely fucks over how it naturally gets released into our body. Yeah. So, thing is here, with Mr. Dopamine, is like with any drug or pleasure chemical, your brain eventually builds up a tolerance to it. And your brain releases more of it the more intense the stimuli is. We all know this, but this is where social media comes in. See, the quicker succession in which you can deliver dopamine to someone, the more engaged they are. Now, this does have the nasty side effect of dulling down everything else in life, but we're not going to get into that because that's not the purpose of this video. But point is, the more dopamine, the more engagement. Now, you slap some ads on that heightened engagement, and, ooh baby, you got yourself a business model. Now, a lot of social media companies obviously utilize this, but so do other tech-adjacent companies. As I discussed, they offer convenience, quick alternatives to normal services or products, and they target the same reward system that works for social media. Here's the problem. As I said, people develop tolerances. So, in order to keep that same level of engagement, like a heroin addict trying to keep up with the last high, is aged just as... You need more and more intense or extreme stimuli. You need to push more and more engaging things. You need to push more and more extreme things. And it also helps if you push more and more divisive things, more polarizing, more shocking, etc. This is where Bong Joon-ho's Parasite is a decidedly interesting film to me, partly because of context. See, I watched it right after I'd just watched my arch nemesis, The Grey Man. See, these two films are about as opposite as it gets. One is a thoughtful, well-presented meditation on class struggle and the difficulty of upwards mobility in the modern world. I guess particularly in Korea, that is well-directed, beautifully shot, unsettling, and well, it's really, really good. I mean, we all know that. It won Best Picture, for God's sake. The Grey Man, on the other hand, is nothing but brain-dead consumerist slop. I'm not saying that no one on the project cared about it. You know, a lot of people obviously did. But not the people in important positions, evidently. Because it is purely uninspired, cliche, half-assed, derivative shit. The Grey Man really is the worst kind of film. One so mediocre, you can't even enjoy it based on the merit of how bad it is. It's just so painfully below average. So the fact I watched one of the most interesting films of the 2010s back to back with, well, that shit, it's an interesting experience. I definitely recommend it. But the politics of these two films, I think, is where it gets really interesting and pertinent to this video. The Grey Man, you see, is just crap designed to appeal to dopamine. It's the film equivalent of sitting on TikTok for 2 hours and just scrolling. It's loud, there's silly quips all the time, it's tone deaf, and it's frankly just bizarre. Not in a good way. This pairs very weirdly against Parasite, a film distinctly about the evils of modern society, of consumerist culture, of the wealth divide, compared against the exact kind of consumerist slop it's criticising. Despite being a ringing endorsement, heck, a product of pure consumerist big corporate fervour, interestingly, people don't perceive it as political in any way. You see, Parasite is political. No doubt it critiques the current system and says something isn't working here. But The Grey Man, that's not political. Supporting the system, for some reason, people think isn't political. It's just normal. That's just what a film is. That's just what you expect. It's apolitical. Do you see where I'm going with this? Parasite is political because it challenges the status quo, but The Grey Man isn't because it supports and reinforces it. So here's the thing. How did we get to a position where not only is this stance commonly echoed in media criticism and analysis? Well, this is where we get to the juicy and divisive part of the video. We're talking about the culture war. For the longest time, the idea of politics in media has been one of the central battlegrounds of the culture war. Whilst the object of fighting might be, diversity hires, trans athletes, female cops, whatever minority is on the cutting block this week, the actual battles themselves have been fought over the politics in media that get used to indoctrinate people. I personally think this idea is stupid, because all media is in some way political. The author's bias will always present itself somehow, or as like I mentioned with The Grey Man, a piece of media is still inherently political just by reinforcing the status quo. Take, for instance, The Matrix. We all know it, we all love it. Guess what? It's got a big, genuinely massive political bias. Despite the analogy within the whole red pill, blue pill thing, and large parts of its iconography being used by the right, The Matrix had an authorial bias of transgender identity. Whether or not you think this is a retroactive decision really doesn't matter for the purposes of this argument, because at the end of the day, it is still the authorial intent, and it's a theme that is baked into the film and has been there since even very, very early versions of the script. There's a lot of films like The Matrix in this regard of, very left-leaning films politically that have been used by the right, like American Psycho, a film about how bad yuppies are and the dangers of insecure, hypermasculine men, or Fight Club, a direct rejection of the modern world, of consumerism, of the current financial system. For Christ's sake, they blow up a number of the US's major financial institutions, and that sounds pretty anti-capitalist to me. Anyway, you get the idea. But I want to focus on The Matrix in particular because it highlights exactly why politics in media is important and why those who attack it don't know the problems that are really facing them. See, we all know The Matrix is a good film. Come on. But it's the informed allegory that really makes it stick. The Matrix obviously works in a purely sci-fi setting, as in, evil robots, rogue AI, and all that. But the symbolism behind the actual Matrix itself, like the actual simulation, is, like most good sci-fi, where the real meat of the story is. The ideas of ignorance, submission, being forced to live a certain way of life, having your real identity or true self constrained to a digital prison, is a very resonant and powerful message. And yeah, Dodoy, it doesn't take a lot to figure out how that applies to the Wachowskis being trans. Like, you can get the ideas of being trapped in what doesn't really feel like the truest self, and getting and being told this isn't the way that things work. You can see how that pretty clearly maps onto being trans. You know, the connections aren't exactly disguised. But it's because this allegory informed decisions about the film and how its world was created that really elevates it and makes it apply to a different and much deeper level. Again, political bias will always inform and affect your art and filmmaking, so it makes sense that you would use this to make a statement, to make your story more impactful, or to use it to impart a message. You know, it really is as simple as that. Somehow, despite that, politics in media is constantly under attack by certain groups. Of course, I don't have to be the one to tell you that these people aren't mad about politics in media being there at all. They're mad that there's politics in media that they don't agree with. Like, that's pretty self-explanatory. But the point that I'm getting at is that they hate media for being too political because it either challenges their beliefs and so, in essence, challenges the status quo. They'll pick apart the grey man for being shite, but it's not political. And they'll pick apart Parasite or take issue with the Wachowskis' stance on the Matrix and its allegory because these stances aren't normal to them. They're not the status quo, ergo political. And that, I feel, has been the great selling point of the culture war. To draw imaginary lines in the sand where they don't exist, to create anger and conflict between groups which should be united, and to drum up division and pointless arguments because, well, the culture war is pointless. Because it, like the lines in the sand that it creates between people, doesn't exist. You remember what I said earlier about big tech, right? Well, they're not entirely responsible, but a big part of it is on them. September 17th, 2011. Might be an important date to some of you, you might recognise it, because it's the day protesters took over Zuccotti Park in New York, marking the beginning of the Occupy Wall Street movement. In simple terms, the movement was a reaction to the mishandling of mortgages and loans undertaken by banks, which caused the 2008 financial crisis, and how the government and Federal Reserve basically just bailed out the banks and saved them, whilst the rest of the world economy crumbled. People, rightfully, were not happy that their own government had sided with the big banks and corporations who had fucked them sideways. Said banks and corps who also conveniently control the Federal Reserve. Again, fun fact here, the Federal Reserve isn't federal. It's a privately owned collection of banks who control the sole right to print and distribute the United States dollar. For the US government to get money, they need to borrow it off the Federal Reserve, and those taxes are how that debt is paid back. In principle, at least. The US has been failing to do that for a long time. Point is, people were unhappy. They were sick of it, and in a rare bipartisan agreement in the States, everyone had come to more or less the same conclusion. Big corporations are fucking dickheads. Except Costco, somehow. Genuinely, how they manage to stay competitive, it baffles me. Anyway, a lot of these big companies were, quite rightfully, worried.
They knew as well as anyone that real tangible change probably wasn't going to happen. After all, the Democrats are just as funded by big corporations as the Republicans. But this unilateral agreement probably had them worried. Now, no one can say exactly where the roots for the culture war came from. Or maybe someone can, but I don't give a shit. What matters about it is that a lot of big companies jumped on that shit as quickly and as hard as they could. News outlets started to say more and more inflammatory shit. Big companies started financially backing think tanks and institutions like the Heritage Foundation, the guys who wrote the documents for Project 2025, while simultaneously putting up pride versions of their logo in June. And social media companies stopped bothering to clear out blatantly inflammatory shit from going tits to the wall viral. Remember what I said about, the more extreme something is, the more the algorithms push it? Yeah, that. And throw in one of the largest social media sites of them all getting co-opted by a man who's pretty much a neo-Nazi, and boom. You've successfully divided the population. You've convinced them to care about things that they shouldn't be caring about. And you've, made a mountain out of a molehill and perfectly divided people. All of a sudden, the discussion is about something that really shouldn't be politicized at all. Like trans people existing, or gender quotas in certain industries, or black people in positions of power, or whatever the goddamn fuck somebody's mad about this week. Things that generally only impact minorities, and come at their expense. And when you think about them for more than about 5 seconds, pretty common sense and shouldn't be political. And yet, these are the arguments now. That's what people are arguing about. Not the fact that Google is ignoring anti-monopoly legislation, or Facebook is basically responsible for Brexit, that BlackRock controls $11.5 trillion of assets, or that BP emits more carbon than the entire United States every year, or that Chevron created an ecological disaster in South America and killed thousands of people because they couldn't be effed to filter out toxic chemicals. So yeah, the culture war has been a great distraction for these companies. But here's the thing. It's starting to run out of gas. People's fervour for it is dying. The moderate voter really doesn't give a shit about it anymore, and major events like Luigi are shifting people's focus away from the culture war again. It's hard to care about some random trans athlete when you can't afford rent. And that's where the problem lies for the people who have bought into the culture war fully and recited all of its core tenets, pushed its message, built their brand around it, because these companies will abandon it the instant it's no longer a useful tool. And the people who have vehemently bought into it will be left holding the bag. Here we are. Welcome back to the Stace's Skull federal election for 2025. I'm Anthony Cream, here with the election coverage. In a landslide victory, alcoholic Albacese's Labour Party has been successfully re-elected, beating out his competitor, Peter button-up-your-pants-before-you-leave-the-pub bathrooms, Low Alcohol Beerall Party. Alco's victory has been mostly credited to a absolutely shocking campaign by the Drunken Mistakes Coalition, who had almost no policies besides cutting ourselves off at only 7 beers a night. The brain cell voters, however, obviously gravitated more towards Alco's promises of free spirits, relief in a cost-of-white monster crisis, and an expansion to the buying more parts for a car which clearly hates us scheme. Do you have any potential expansions to your current policy platform? As critics are saying, whilst this is a landslide victory, you're not doing enough to combat the core issues, Alco.
No, listen here. The Brain Shellian people have elected us with a clear mandate, which we will fulfil. Although,
Further expansion is not out of the question.
Will this expansion potentially include slapping Fiddy on the pokies tonight?
We'll have to wait and see. Hey Toto, you're the wrong colour. Time for bleach.
The recent Australian federal election can be best described as a horrible day to be a Liberal MP. I mean, heck, it was a pretty horrible day to be a Greens MP too. The Nationals got out mostly unscathed, but broadly speaking, the only real winners were the few Teals who did end up deepening their margins, and of course Labor, who whooped the shit out of everyone else. There's a lot of factors that influenced Labor's victory, i.e. they're a reasonably competent government who's made a lot of common sense policy decisions, towed the line most of the time, and had, well, pretty much no controversies to speak of. They've made big and greatly appreciated expansions to social services, made a huge amount of progress on green energy, got wages growing, inflation down, and unemployment down at the same time, and have just been generally a sensible, competent government appealing to everyday people. I won't deny, however, that a big part of what enabled them to win this election so decisively was that the coalition, the centre-right party, or faction, I guess, in Australian politics, dropped the ball, to say the least. The coalition ran with almost no policies besides the incredibly unpopular nuclear plan, bat-flipped on all of the other ones that they did have, tried to emulate Trump, and in a broader sense, although they have been doing this for a while now, have been abandoning their core moderate voter base and leaning further and further towards the right. But again, they've been doing that for a while, I would honestly say since Howard left office, with a minor blip in the middle, of course, being Turnbull, who was quite a moderate politician willing to work with the other parties to get legislation through. And so, obviously, because of that, got stabbed in the back by his own party, and now hates them. To quote good old mate Kevin Rudd, "You'd be more at home on our side of politics," to which Malcolm agreed. The point is, the Liberals and the Nationals, the two main parties who made up the coalition, have been slowly deteriorating for a long time. And Peter Dutton's focus on the culture war and identity politics and issues and topics which worked for his mate Trump, shot him, he lost his own seat, and his party right in the foot. Point is, it's clear from both this and the Canadian election that culture war tactics don't really work anymore. And it's clear the coalition was just left to hang out to dry after the big corporations who pushed them into this abandoned them. And this should probably be a big word of warning to all of those who have also based large chunks of their platform or brand on the culture war. Because it doesn't exist, it's never existed, and it never would have even gotten off the ground into somewhat mainstream consciousness if it hadn't been pumped up by all of the big corporations who needed to use it as a distraction tool. And once those companies decide that there's a more effective way of achieving the same goal, which it seems like they already have, they'll just drop it and leave you holding the bag. There's a saying I like that applies here. And it's a goofy one. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And to many reactionary conservatives and leftists, you are the ones who have been played. And the only prize that I think you'll find you'll get is getting effed right in the side as your brand collapses, all for somebody else's bottom line. Thank you for watching. I've been filmed by Stace, and if you haven't already, go vote for your own interests, not big corporations. And go watch Parasite. Shit is absolutely gun.
I wish I could give you up, but you're my new favorite drug. Enter into my blood, run with my toxic